In a glass building where power spoke louder than truth, a young woman stood soaked in humiliation while laughter echoed around her. She had done nothing wrong, yet everyone looked away. Just meters from her, a poor cleaner lay on the wet floor, pushed down like he was nothing, his dignity stripped in seconds. No one helped, no one cared. In that office, cruelty wore expensive shoes and silence became a weapon. But what if the man they mocked every day held the fate of that entire company in his hands? What if the woman they crushed carried a kind of strength money could never buy? This is a story about hidden worth, quiet courage, and a truth so powerful it would shake an entire empire. Stay with us, because what happens next will change everything. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is in your country. And if stories of justice, hidden identities, and hope move your heart, don't forget to subscribe and walk this journey with us. The company sat at the center of the city like a monument to ambition. Glass walls, steel frames, and a constant hum of urgency that never slept. In Lagos, where traffic roared like an untamed river and dreams were traded every morning for salaries and titles, this office was a battlefield disguised as a workplace. People didn't just come to earn a living. They came to be seen, to be louder than the next person, to climb even if it meant stepping on someone else's neck. Among the sharp heels and polished suits walked a young woman named Zainab Adeyemi. Zainab did not announce herself when she entered a room. She greeted the security guard with a soft good morning that often went unanswered. She held the elevator door when she could, even when others rolled their eyes. She prayed quietly at her desk before starting work. Fingers clasped, eyes closed for just a moment long enough to remember who she was in a place that tried daily to erase her. People noticed her, but not in the way she deserved. "She's strange," they whispered. "Too quiet. Always acting holy." Zainab worked in the administrative unit handling paperwork no one wanted to touch. She stayed late without complaint. She corrected mistakes that weren't hers. She smiled when spoken to and kept her head down when she wasn't. In a company where arrogance was rewarded and empathy was mistaken for weakness, her kindness marked her as an easy target. Then, one Monday morning, the whispers shifted. A new cleaner had started work. He arrived early before most of the staff, dressed in a faded blue uniform that looked borrowed rather than owned. His shoes were worn at the edges, the kind that had known too many long walks. He carried a mop and a plastic bucket that had seen better days, and the faint smell of soap followed him wherever he went. He told them his name was Kola Mensa. The laughter began almost immediately. "Look at his hands," one woman scoffed, nudging her friend. "Too soft. This one has never worked a day in his life. He doesn't even walk like a cleaner," another added. "Maybe he's pretending." Kola said nothing. He kept his eyes lowered, moving carefully across the shiny floors, as if he were afraid to disturb them. He cleaned the corners others ignored. He wiped spills without complaint. When spoken to, he answered politely, briefly, and stepped aside. Zainab noticed everything. She noticed how people bumped into him without apologizing, how they barked orders instead of saying please, how a senior staff member once dropped a file deliberately and watched, amused, as Kola bent to pick it up. The breaking point came on a humid Tuesday morning. Kola had just finished mopping near the finance department when Keiichi, one of the loudest voices in the office, pushed past him in a hurry. Her heel slid on the wet floor, and she nearly fell. Instead of apologizing or even pausing, she spun around, rage flashing across her face. "Are you blind?" she shouted. "Can't you see where you're cleaning, you stupid man?" The hallway fell silent. Kola froze mop, still in his hand. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. That was when Zainab stepped forward. "He's just doing his job," she said calmly. Her voice was soft, but it cut through the air. "You didn't wait for the floor to dry." And Keiichi turned surprised. Then she laughed a sharp, ugly sound. "Oh, since when do you defend cleaners?" she sneered. "Is this your level? Now?" A few people chuckled. Others looked away, suddenly very interested in their phones. Zainab said nothing more. She simply turned back to her desk, her hands shaking just enough for Kola to notice. That afternoon, during her lunch break, Zainab returned with a small paper bag and a bottle of water. She waited until no one was watching, then placed them gently on the window ledge where Kola was resting. "You didn't have to," he said, quietly startled. "You looked hungry," she replied, offering a small smile. "And no one deserves to be treated like that." Something shifted inside Kola, then something deep and unfamiliar. He watched her walk away, her shoulders slightly hunched, as if she were carrying more than just her handbag. In that moment, he understood something important. Zainab was different. The next morning, the sky opened without warning. Rain poured down in thick sheets, drenching the city and turning roads into rivers. By the time Zainab arrived at the office, her umbrella lay broken in her bag and her shoes squelched with every step. Her blouse clung uncomfortably to her skin. No one offered her a towel. No one asked if she was all right. Instead, laughter erupted. "Look at her," Nkechi shouted across the room. "Wet like a street dog. Cleaner's girlfriend," someone else added. The laughter spread loud and merciless. Even the security guard at the entrance hid his face, pretending to adjust his cap. Zainab stood there soaked and shaking, clutching her worn handbag to her chest. She said nothing. She simply walked to her desk only to stop short. Her chair was gone. Someone had taken it. She stood still for a moment, then quietly fetched a plastic chair from the hallway and sat down. It wobbled under her weight, one leg cracked. Each movement threatened to send her crashing to the floor. She didn't complain. Kola watched from a distance, his chest tightening with something dangerously close to anger. He moved closer, lowering his voice. "Do you want me to help you find your chair?" he asked. Zainab shook her head, forcing a smile. "They want me to react," she whispered. "I won't give them that." Later, in the quiet of the stairwell, Zainab leaned against the wall, her breath coming in short, tired bursts. "I did everything right," she murmured to herself. "Why do they hate me?" Kola stepped forward. "You don't deserve any of this." She wiped her tears, quickly embarrassed. "It's okay," she said. "I'm used to it." He looked at her, then not as a cleaner, looked at a staff member, but as one human being looked at another who was breaking quietly. "No," he said gently. "You're not meant to get used to pain." Zainab met his eyes, surprised by the conviction in his voice. For the first time in that building, someone truly saw her. The rain eased by evening, but the weight it left behind clung to the city like damp clothing that refused to dry. Zainab walked home with her shoes in her hand, each step careful on the slick pavement. Her feet ached from cheap heels that had soaked through hours earlier, and the folder pressed against her chest felt heavier than paper had any right to be. Inside it were documents stamped with rejection applications returned without explanation, hopes quietly dismissed. People passed her without a glance. In a city bursting with life, she felt invisible. Her room was a single space at the edge of a forgotten compound where the walls carried old cracks like scars, and the light bulb flickered when it worked at all. The landlord's message about rent echoed in her mind. So did the emptiness of her kitchen, half a tuber of yam, nothing more. She sat on the floor, changed into a wrapper, and breathed through the hunger until it dulled into a quiet throb. That night, she studied by candlelight. Notes spread across the floor, eyes, heavy stomach, empty. She whispered a prayer anyway. It was what her mother had taught her to do when there was nothing else left to give. The next morning, she arrived early. Early was safer. Early meant fewer eyes, fewer comments, fewer chances to be cut open by words. She greeted the guard. He nodded, this time distracted. Inside the office buzzed awake. Kola was already there. He moved with deliberate care, cleaning the glass doors where fingerprints gathered like evidence of 1,000 hurried hands. His uniform was still damp from laundry done late the night before. He had no iron. The sleeves were creased to the collar, soft with wear. When he saw Zainab, he gave a small nod, nothing more, nothing that would invite attention. But attention found them anyway. Always together, someone whispered near the printer. Maybe that's why she's so confident now, another replied. Poor attracts poor. Zainab felt the words land one by one, but she kept her head down. She typed through the sting, breathing slowly, reminding herself not to react. Mid-morning, a senior supervisor passed Kola, carrying a cup of steaming tea. The hallway was crowded. The man slowed just enough, then tilted his wrist. The tea spilled. Hot liquid splashed across Kola's arm and pooled on the freshly cleaned floor. The supervisor smirked. Oops, careful cleaner. Or are you blind? Laughter followed sharp, careless practice. Kola hissed quietly as the heat bit into his skin. He crouched immediately, grabbing a rag to wipe the mess before it spread. His fingers trembled, not from pain alone, but from the familiar humiliation that came with moments like this. Zainab stood. She crossed the hallway without thinking, knelt beside him, and began wiping the floor with her own handkerchief. Her skirt brushed the tiles. Her knees pressed into the cold. The laughter stopped. She did not look up at first. She focused on the spill, on the simple act of cleaning. When she finished, she lifted her eyes to the supervisor. "Do you feel bigger now?" she asked quietly. Humiliating someone who works hard and harms no one. The man blinked, caught off guard. He opened his mouth, then closed it. No one laughed this time. Zainab stood and offered Kola her hand. He hesitated, then took it. As he rose, their eyes met, his filled with disbelief, hers steady and unafraid. She returned to her desk without another word. That afternoon the sky darkened again. Rain threatened, but held back, hanging heavy in the air. Zainab packed up slowly, dreading the walk home. As she stepped outside, Kola fell into pace beside her, holding a torn nylon bag over his head like a shield. "I'll walk with you," he said. They moved in silence, at first the city's noise filling the space between them. Then she spoke, her voice barely above the traffic. "You shouldn't have to go through that," she said. "It's not fair." He gave a sad smile. "Life isn't fair, but sometimes it gives us people who make it bearable." She turned to him, surprised by the gentleness of his words. "You make mine bearable." His heart stumbled. He said nothing, afraid that if he spoke he might say too much. At the junction where they usually parted, they stopped. Rain finally fell, light at first, then heavier. Drops clung to their lashes, their clothes, their unspoken thoughts. "Thank you," she said, "for being kind when the world isn't." "No," he replied softly. "Thank you for seeing me." That night sleep refused him. He lay on his thin mattress, staring at the ceiling, thinking of the way she knelt without hesitation, the way she spoke without raising her voice, the way she endured without bitterness. He thought of his mother and the prayers she used to whisper over him when he was a boy. She would have loved Zainab, he knew. The days that followed tested them both. A file went missing from the finance department, an important one. Panic spread quickly, and with it suspicion. Fingers pointed without evidence, and the office turned restless. "We all saw her near the manager's desk," someone said, eyes sliding towards Zainab. "I picked up a paper," Zainab explained, voice shaking despite herself. "It was an old printout. I threw it away. Security was called. Drawers opened. Bags searched. Desks examined. Nothing was found. Still, the shame lingered." Kola watched from the corner, his grip tight on the mop handle. Every instinct screamed at him to step forward to end this, to reveal the truth and crush the cruelty with power. But he stayed where he was. Not yet. Later, he found her in the stairwell, shoulders trembling as she tried to breathe through tears she refused to let fall loudly. "You believe me," she said when she saw him. It wasn't a question. "I do," he replied. "You have an honest heart." The words loosened something inside her. She exhaled, long and slow, as if she had been holding her breath for years. From that moment, the bond between them was no longer fragile. It was quiet, yes, but it was strong. And the office felt it. The next few days passed under a low, oppressive sky, the kind that pressed down on the city and made every breath feel heavier than it should. Inside the office, the atmosphere shifted in subtle but unmistakable ways. Conversations stopped when Zainab walked past. Laughter followed her like a shadow. Even the air around her desk felt colder, sharper, as if the space itself had learned how to reject her. That morning, the rain returned with a vengeance. By the time Zainab arrived, it was no longer falling, it was attacking. Wind tore through the streets, umbrellas turned inside out, and water pooled at the gate like a warning. She had tried to shield herself, but the rain won. Her blouse was soaked through. Her skirt clung uncomfortably to her legs, and her hair, neatly packed just an hour earlier, was damp and unruly. She stepped into the lobby, water dripping from her sleeves onto the polished floor. Silence fell for half a second. Then it shattered. "Ah, look at her." Nkechi's voice rang out loud and cruel. "She looks like she slept in the gutter." Another voice joined in sharper. "Cleaner's girlfriend." Of course, she'd come in like this. Laughter erupted, full, unrestrained, bouncing off the walls. Some people laughed openly. Others hid their smiles behind hands and files. A few glanced away, pretending they hadn't seen anything at all. Zainab stood there, heart-pounding, cold, seeping into her bones. She hugged her worn handbag to her chest like armor. Her eyes burned, but she refused to let the tears fall. Crying here would give them exactly what they wanted. She walked to her desk and stopped. Her chair was gone. For a moment she thought she had made a mistake. She looked left, then right. The space where her chair should have been was empty, clean, deliberate. Her stomach tightened. Someone had taken it. A murmur rippled through the office. Low laughter, whispers sharp with anticipation. They were watching her now, waiting, hoping she would explode, hoping she would beg. Zainab did neither. She stood there for a few seconds, her hands trembling slightly, then turned and walked toward the hallway. She returned, carrying a small plastic chair, the kind used for visitors, already cracked on one side. She placed it at her desk and sat down carefully. The chair wobbled under her weight. Every time she shifted, it creaked, threatening to collapse. Her thighs burned from the cold plastic, her back ached from the awkward angle, but she stayed silent. She opened her computer. She began to work. Across the room, Kola felt something tear inside his chest. He watched her balance on that broken chair, watched the way she straightened her spine as if daring the world to break her completely. He moved closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Do you want me to help you find your chair?" he asked gently. She shook her head, forcing a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "They want me to react," she whispered. "I won't." He nodded, though it took everything in him to walk away. Hours passed slowly. The rain outside softened, but inside the office the cruelty thickened. Zainab's fingers ached from typing. Her clothes were still damp, chilling her skin. No one offered her a jacket. No one offered her sympathy. She worked through it all, her face calm, her spirit bleeding quietly. During a short break, she retreated to the stairwell, the only place where the walls didn't seem to listen. She leaned against the cool concrete, breathing heavily, her strength finally giving way. I tried so hard, she whispered to herself, voice cracking. I did everything right. Why do they hate me? She didn't realize she wasn't alone. Kola stood a few steps away, having followed her without thinking. He hesitated, then spoke. You don't deserve any of this. She startled, then wiped her tears, quickly embarrassed to be seen. It's okay, she said, her voice thin. I'm used to it. The words struck him harder than any insult ever could. No, he said softly, stepping closer. You're not supposed to get used to pain. She looked at him, then really looked at him. There was no pity in his eyes, no judgment, only a quiet certainty that made her chest tighten. You're meant to be protected from it. Her lips trembled. For a moment, she couldn't speak. When she finally did, her voice was barely a whisper. Thank you. You're the only one who sees me. He wanted to say more. He wanted to tell her how wrong this place was, how temporary this suffering would be, how the truth would one day roar through these halls and silence every cruel laugh. But he held his tongue. Not yet. That evening, the clouds finally parted, but the city remained wrapped in gray. Zainab walked home slowly, shoes in hand once again. Her feet ached, her shoulders sagged, and the folder pressed against her chest felt heavier than ever. The documents inside were still marked with rejection, still telling her she wasn't enough. She passed through the market street, eyes down, until something made her stop. An old woman sat by the roadside shivering. Her wrapper was torn, her hands shaking as she struggled to push a wheelbarrow with a few scattered bananas. The rain had soaked everything, her clothes, her goods, her dignity. Zainab hesitated. She had nothing to spare, no money, no food, no energy. Her body screamed for rest. Still, she stepped forward. "Mama, are you okay?" she asked softly. The woman looked up, eyes tired but alert. "I haven't sold anything today," she said, "and I can't push this back home." Zainab dropped her shoes and her folder without a second thought. "Let me help you." "But you're dressed for work," the woman protested weakly. Zainab smiled a small, tired smile. "It's okay. You remind me of my mother." The woman blinked. "Where is she?" Zainab's smile faded. Gone. They walked together through puddles and broken stones, the wheelbarrow groaning under the strain. The old woman muttered prayers under her breath, words of blessing carried on the damp air. When they reached her small hut, she tried to press 2 bananas into Zainab's hands. "Please," she insisted. Zainab shook her head. "Keep them. Maybe you'll sell them tomorrow." The woman held her hand tightly. "You are light in a dark place," she said. "God will surprise you, my child." Zainab knotted her throat too tight to reply. When she finally reached her room, darkness greeted her. The electricity was still gone. She lit a candle, changed into a wrapper, and sat on the floor beside her small table. Hunger gnawed at her, but exhaustion dulled it. She opened her wooden locker and took out the old photographs wrapped in nylon. Her mother, her siblings, all of them laughing beneath a mango tree. She pressed the picture to her chest. "I miss you, Mama," she whispered. Tears fell quiet, ones the kind that came when a soul was tired of pretending to be strong. Somewhere across the city, Kola sat by his window staring at the same hidden moon, thinking of the woman who endured too much and asked for too little. Neither of them knew how close the storm was to breaking. The candle burned low as the night stretched on its small flame, trembling each time the wind slipped through the cracked window. Zainab sat on the floor of her room, legs folded beneath her eyes fixed on the pages before her. The words blurred now, and then not from sleep but from hunger she had learned to ignore. She paused only to whisper a prayer, her voice barely louder than the hiss of the candle. When the flame finally died, she lay back on the thin mattress, staring into darkness. Sleep came late and left early. Morning arrived without mercy. Her alarm buzzed at 5. Zainab rose slowly, joints stiff headlight. She washed her face with cold water from a plastic bucket and dressed carefully, choosing the least worn blouse she owned. The tear in her shoe was small, hidden if she walked just right. She tied her scarf neatly and looked at herself in the cracked mirror. "You can do this," she whispered. It was not confidence, it was survival. The walk to work felt longer than usual. Traffic roared, horns screamed, and vendors shouted their wares with voices full of hunger and hope. Zainab moved through it all, quietly arriving at the office gate with minutes to spare. She greeted the guard, who barely glanced at her, and stepped inside. The office greeted her with indifference. People passed without acknowledgement. A few looked her up and down, eyes lingering on her shoes, her tired face. Whispers followed her like insects. She sat at her desk. Her own chair had returned, though she knew it wasn't an apology. It was simply another way to say we can take and return things at will. She worked. Hours blurred together in a rhythm of typing, filing, correcting mistakes she hadn't made. Her stomach cramped. She ignored it. When lunch came, she stayed at her desk, pretending to review documents, while others gathered in groups, laughing loudly. No one invited her. No one ever did. Kola passed by once, pushing his bucket slowly. Their eyes met for a second. He gave a small nod, steady grounding. It helped more than he knew. By evening, her body was done. When she finally stood, the room spun briefly, then settled. She gathered her things and left quietly, slipping back into the city as if she had never existed. Outside, the sky was painted in fading orange and gray. Zainab walked with her shoes in hand again, feet sore against the warm pavement. She moved through the market street, senses dulled by fatigue, until she saw her. The old woman was there again. She sat in the same spot as the day before, the wheelbarrow beside her bananas. Fewer, now, their yellow skins spotted with brown. Her shoulders sagged, her head bowed. People passed her without a glance. Zainab stopped. She didn't think about her empty stomach or the darkness waiting at home. She didn't think about tomorrow's bills or yesterday's humiliation. She only saw a woman who needed help. "Mama," she said gently, "have you eaten today?" The old woman looked up, eyes softening at the sound of concern. "Not yet, my daughter," she replied. "God will provide." Zainab swallowed. She reached into her bag and pulled out the last money she had, coins meant for transport the next day. She pressed them into the woman's hand. "Please," she said before the woman could protest, "buy food." The old woman stared at the coins, then at Zainab's face. "But I'll manage," Zainab said, smiling though her knees trembled. The woman closed her fingers around the coins and reached for Zainab's hand. "Your heart is heavy with goodness," she murmured. "One day it will be your turn to receive." Zainab nodded, unable to speak, and walked away before the tears could come. Her room welcomed her with silence and darkness. The electricity was still gone. She lit another candle, the last one. The flame cast shadows on the walls, making the space feel smaller than it already was. She opened her locker again and took out the photographs. She traced her mother's face with trembling fingers, remembering the warmth of her voice, the way she used to hum while cooking, the strength in her quiet presence. "You said I would be okay," Zainab whispered. "I'm trying." She lay down without eating, wrapping her arms around herself as if to replace what was missing. Sleep came in fragments. Across the city, in a modest two-room flat tucked behind a tailor's shop, Kola sat by his window, the night breeze brushing his face. His home was simple. No television, no luxury, just clean walls. A wooden shelf filled with books and a small table where a framed photograph rested. His mother's photograph. He picked it up, thumb-brushing the edge of the frame. "You would like her," he said softly. "She's kind. Too kind for this world." He thought of Zainab's tired smile, the way she knelt without hesitation, the way she kept giving even when she had nothing left. He felt the familiar tug of urgency in his chest, the desire to step in to end her suffering with a word, a name, a truth. But he didn't. Not yet. The next morning, Zainab woke with her head pounding and her body heavy. She sat up slowly, the room tilting. For a moment, she considered staying home. The thought passed quickly. Missing a day meant questions. Questions meant trouble. She dressed her movements slower than usual and stepped out into the morning. At work, the atmosphere was thick with something she couldn't name. Conversations hushed when she passed. Eyes followed her more openly now. It was as if her quiet endurance had begun to irritate them. Midday, she went to the break room to fetch warm water for her headache. Her steps were unsteady. She focused on breathing, on making it back to her desk. She didn't. The world narrowed suddenly. The cup slipped from her hand, shattering against the tiled floor. Papers scattered like frightened birds. Zainab collapsed. For a heartbeat, no one moved. "Is she serious?" someone muttered. "She's probably pretending," another voice added, always looking for pity. The manager glanced out from his glass office, frowned, and turned back to his computer. No one helped. Then a bucket clattered to the floor. Kola was running. He dropped to his knees beside her, cradling her head gently. "Zainab," he called, panic rising in his voice. "Please look at me." Her skin burned beneath his touch. Her breathing was shallow, uneven. "Someone call for help," he shouted. No one moved. Something broke inside him then, not loudly but completely. He lifted her into his arms, her body limp against his chest. People stepped back as he pushed through rain, greeting them as he burst outside. He carried her through the streets, ignoring the stares, the refusals, the weight of her pain pressing into his heart. At the small clinic 3 streets away, they laid her on a narrow bed. The nurse's face tightened as she examined her. "High fever," she said. "Severe exhaustion. Malnutrition." Kola sank onto a stool head in his hands. "She gives everything she has," he whispered, "and no one sees her." The nurse looked at him steadily. "Except you." He lifted his head, eyes glassy. "I see her." And for the first time since he had put on that faded uniform, Kola knew with certainty that the line between waiting and acting was growing dangerously thin. Night settled over the clinic like a heavy blanket. The small room smelled of antiseptic and damp walls, and the single bulb above flickered as if struggling to stay awake. Zainab lay on the narrow bed, her breathing uneven, her skin still too warm beneath the thin sheet. Kola sat beside her, elbows on his knees, hands clasped tightly as though holding on to her was the only thing keeping him anchored to the ground. He had not left her side. The nurse passed by once or twice, adjusting the drip, checking her temperature. Each time, she glanced at him with quiet curiosity. She had seen many people brought into that clinic, wives abandoned, children left behind, accidents treated and forgotten. But she had rarely seen a man sit so still, so determined, as if moving even an inch might cause something precious to shatter. When Zainab stirred and murmured his name in her sleep, Kola's chest tightened painfully. "I'm here," he whispered, though she couldn't hear him. "I'm not going anywhere." Hours later, when the fever finally eased and her breathing grew calmer, he allowed himself to lean back against the wall. His body ached, his clothes still damp from rain and sweat, but he welcomed the pain. It reminded him that this was real, that she was real. As the clinic quieted, his thoughts grew louder. This was never how he had imagined it. Months earlier, when he had first stepped into the company wearing a cleaner's uniform, he had done so with careful intention. Kola Mensa was not a poor man. He had never truly been one. Born into wealth, raised among boardrooms and guarded compounds, he had learned early that money could open doors, but it could also close hearts. After his mother died, something inside him shifted. She had been the only person who treated him the same whether he wore a suit or a simple shirt, the only one who reminded him that character mattered more than comfort. On her sickbed, she had held his hand and said, "Find someone who sees people not possessions. That kind of love will save you." He had taken those words seriously. So when he inherited full control of the company, he made a decision no one expected. He would step inside his own empire unseen. He would clean the floors, listen to conversations no one thought important, watch how people behaved when they believed no power was watching. And he would wait. At first, it had been almost amusing. The arrogance, the carelessness, the way people revealed themselves in small, ugly ways. But then he noticed Zainab. She never spoke ill of anyone. She thanked him when he did the smallest thing. She defended him when it cost her nothing and later when it cost her everything. She gave away food she needed, money she couldn't spare, strength she barely had. And now she lay here because of it. Kola clenched his jaw. He could end this tonight. One call, one name spoken aloud. The guards, the managers, the bullies, they would all fall into line instantly. Zainab would never be mocked again. Her bills would be paid. Her suffering erased with the stroke of a pen. But would that be justice? Or would it only prove what he feared most, that power, not truth, decided who deserved dignity? He looked at her sleeping face, pale but peaceful now. She had not been kind because she expected rescue. She had been kind because it was who she was. If he stepped in too soon, would she ever know if someone could love her without knowing her worth in numbers? Would he ever know if she would choose him without the shield of wealth? The doctor approached quietly, an elderly man with tired eyes and gentle hands. "You're not her family," he said, more statement than question. Kola hesitated. "No, sir." The doctor studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Then I hope you become one," he said softly. "People like you are rare." Kola swallowed hard. "She's rare, too." By morning, Zainab was awake. Her eyes fluttered open slowly, confusion clouding them at first, then recognition. "Kola," she whispered. He leaned forward immediately. "I'm here." She tried to sit up, winced, then relaxed back against the pillow. "You carried me," she said, her voice unsteady. It wasn't a question. It was disbelief. He nodded. "You scared me." Tears welled in her eyes. She turned her face, slightly ashamed of them. "No one has ever done that for me before." Something in his chest cracked open. "You're not alone anymore," he said quietly. She stayed in the clinic for 2 nights. Kola barely slept. He fed her when she was strong enough to eat, wiped her forehead when the fever tried to return, spoke to her softly about nothing and everything. He told her about the books he liked about the city when it was quiet at dawn, about his mother's love for simple things, fresh flowers, warm bread, old songs. He did not tell her who he was. On the 3rd day, she insisted on leaving. "I can't stay here," she said gently. "It costs money." "I'll take you somewhere safe," he replied. "Just for a few days." She hesitated, then nodded. Trust flickered in her eyes, fragile but real. They walked slowly through muddy streets, avoiding puddles, passing vendors frying akara and children chasing one another barefoot. When they reached the compound where Kola lived, Zainab stopped. "This is your home?" she asked softly. The gate was rusted. The walls bore the marks of age and rain. Inside life moved simply women washing clothes, men repairing radios, children laughing without care. "It's not much," he said, "but it's peaceful." His room was small, clean, and honest. A single bed, a wooden table, a shelf with books and a worn Bible. His mother's photograph rested beside a wildflower in a cup. Zainab touched the flower gently. "Your mother?" He nodded. "She died before I moved here. She was everything." "You picked this?" she asked. "Yes." he admitted, embarrassed. "Every Friday. I talk to her sometimes." She smiled softly. "It's beautiful." That night he gave her the bed and slept on the floor. When she woke around midnight and saw him shivering slightly, she covered him with the wrapper. "You shouldn't be walking," he murmured. "I'm fine," she replied. "But you saved me." He sat up, voice breaking. "You've been saving me for a long time." They sat in silence, the kind that healed instead of hurt. And in that quiet room, Kola knew his secret could not stay buried forever. But he also knew that when it surfaced, it would change everything. When Zainab returned to work after the days at the clinic, her body was still weak, but something inside her had changed. She walked more slowly now, listening to her breathing, aware of how fragile strength could be. Kola walked beside her to the junction that morning, as he had done since she recovered his presence, quiet but steady. "Take it easy today," he said. She smiled faintly. "I will." The office doors opened with the same cold indifference as always. Inside, the air felt tight, charged with something unspoken. Conversations dropped the moment Zainab stepped in. Heads leaned together, eyes flicked toward her and away again. She felt it immediately, the familiar weight of being watched, judged, measured. She went to her desk and began to work. Less than an hour later, the tension broke. A sharp voice cut through the hum of keyboards. "Everyone, please pay attention." It was Mrs. Oladipo from the finance unit, her lips pressed into a thin line. She stood near the manager's glass office, arms crossed, eyes scanning the room. "There is a missing document," she announced. "A very important one." Murmurs rose. Chairs shifted. Someone coughed nervously. "It was last seen on the manager's desk yesterday evening," she continued, "and this morning it's gone." The room buzzed with speculation. People whispered names. Accusations floated lightly at first, then grew bolder. Then Mrs. Oladipo's gaze settled on Zainab. "We all saw her pick up something from the floor near that desk yesterday," she said. Every head turned. Zainab froze. Her heart slammed painfully against her ribs. I picked up a paper," she said, forcing the words out. "It was an old printout. I threw it away." And Nkechi scoffed loudly. "You're always snooping around." "That's not true," Zainab whispered, her hands trembling. Security was called. Two men approached her desk. They opened her drawers, rifled through her files, peered into her handbag with practiced indifference. The entire office watched in silence as her personal space was stripped bare. They found nothing. Not a single page. "She's clean," one of the guards said, eventually, his tone flat. Still, the damage had been done. The whispers didn't stop. They grew sharper, more poisonous. Just because they didn't find it doesn't mean she didn't do it. She looks like the type, always acting innocent. Zainab sat back down, her face burning her chest tight with humiliation. She wanted to disappear. From across the room, Kola watched his hands clenched around the mop handle until his knuckles whitened. Every part of him screamed to step forward to put an end to this cruelty with the truth he carried like a loaded weapon. But he didn't move. Not yet. Later that day, he found Zainab in the stairwell again. She stood with her back to the wall, shoulders shaking as she tried to steady her breathing. "You believe me, right?" she asked when she saw him. Her eyes searched his face desperately. "I do," he said without hesitation. "You have an honest heart." She let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Tears spilled freely now, and she didn't bother wiping them away. No one ever says that she whispered. The following days were worse. The accusation clung to her like a stain no amount of innocence could wash away. Every mistake, every delay, every missing item, eyes turned to her first. Her desk was moved closer to the hallway, away from others. Her greetings went unanswered. Her presence became an inconvenience. During lunch breaks, seats emptied when she approached. Conversations died when she sat down. Once, as she tried to settle into her usual corner of the break room, a woman stood abruptly spilling hot coffee onto Zainab's file. "Oops," she sneered. "Maybe you should go sit with your cleaner boyfriend." Laughter followed. Zainab sat anyway, hands shaking as she tried to salvage the damp pages. She blinked back tears, her jaw clenched in quiet determination. Kola watched from the doorway, his chest aching with helpless anger. He wanted to wrap her in protection to pull her out of that place forever. But he also saw the way she straightened her back, the way she refused to bow. She was fighting in her own way. The breaking point came just before closing time. 2 security officers entered the office, their faces hard, official. The room fell silent. Amina Bello, one of them, called. Zainab's blood ran cold. Slowly, she stood. "Yes, you are under arrest for embezzlement and theft of company funds." The words crashed over her like a wave. What she cried, "That's impossible. I didn't." Metal cuffs snapped around her wrists. Gasps filled the room. Papers fell, phones slipped from hands. Some people looked shocked, others looked satisfied. Nkichi rose slowly from her seat arms, folded a smug smile playing on her lips. "You should have known it wouldn't last," she said. "Acting like a saint when you're just a thief." Zainab turned to her, tears streaming. "You know this isn't true." "I saw the transactions," another voice chimed in. "She forged signatures," someone added. Lies piled upon lies. Zainab's legs gave way, but the guards held her upright. Her cries were drowned out by the clinking of handcuffs and the low murmur of the office. As they dragged her toward the exit, she searched the room frantically, not for mercy, not for pity. For Kola. He wasn't there. Her heart shattered. Outside, the police van waited. Rain had begun to fall again, as if the sky itself mourned her fate. She was pushed inside the door, slamming shut with finality. The laughter echoed in her ears long after the van pulled away. The cell was cold and smelled of rust and despair. Zainab sat on the floor, knees drawn to her chest, her mind numb. Other women whispered, pointed, judged. She didn't care. She had nothing left. Hours later, the metal door creaked open. Visitor a guard barked. Zainab lifted her head slowly. Kola stood there. Her breath caught painfully. "Kola," she whispered. He stepped closer, gripping the bars, his face etched with anguish. "I'm so sorry," he said, voice thick. "I should have protected you. I should have been there." She reached through the bars and took his hand, clinging to it like a lifeline. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why did they do this to me?" "Because you are good," he replied. "And goodness threatens darkness." Tears slid down her cheeks. "I've lost everything." "No," he said firmly, "you haven't lost me." She looked at him, broken and exhausted. "I don't know how much more I can take." He tightened his grip. Tomorrow, he promised, eyes burning with resolve. "The truth will come out. And you will walk out of here free." For the first time since the handcuffs closed around her wrists, Zainab felt a flicker of hope. She didn't know how he would do it. She only knew she believed him. Morning broke over the city with a strange stillness, the kind that came before something irreversible. Inside the company building, tension sat heavy on every floor. People spoke in whispers, eyes darting as if the walls themselves had learned to listen. The previous day's arrest lingered like smoke, unsettling, choking, impossible to ignore. Zainab's desk stood empty. Some avoided looking at it altogether. Others glanced at it with thinly veiled satisfaction. A few felt an uncomfortable twist of guilt, but buried it quickly beneath routine. Life went on, they told themselves. It always did. Kola arrived earlier than usual. His uniform was clean, but creased, the sleeves still wrinkled from air drying overnight. He moved quietly through the lobby, mop and bucket in hand, nodding politely as always. But inside him, a storm raged. Every step echoed with the memory of metal cuffs closing around Zainab's wrists. Every reflection in the glass reminded him that silence, too, could be a form of violence. As the morning progressed, the cruelty that had been simmering found a new target. "Cleaner boy," Stanley called out loudly near the main hallway, a cup of tea balanced carelessly in his hand. "Come bless us with your poverty perfume." Laughter erupted. Kola paused, steadying his breath, then continued mopping. He had learned long ago that reacting often fed the hunger of people like Stanley. He focused on the floor, on the rhythm of the mop, on staying invisible. But invisibility did not protect him. Delara, one of the most ruthless women in the office, strode past in high heels. Without breaking her stride, she kicked Kola's bucket hard. Soapy water splashed across the floor, soaking his trousers and shoes. The bucket toppled over, rolling away. Before he could react, Stanley shoved him in the chest. Kola slipped on the wet floor and fell hard, the impact knocking the breath from his lungs. Pain shot through his elbow as it scraped against the tiles. The mop clattered away, coming to rest a few feet from him. The hallway exploded with laughter. "Look at him," Stanley jeered, crying like a stray dog. Kola lay there for a moment, stunned, not by the pain, but by the familiar weight of humiliation pressing down on him. Slowly, he pushed himself up onto his hands and knees. His chest burned. His throat tightened. "I'm sorry," he whispered, crawling toward the bucket. "I'll clean it." Tears slipped from his eyes, not loud, not dramatic. Just quiet tears, the kind that fell when dignity was stripped away piece by piece. And then the laughter stopped. Footsteps echoed through the hallway, measured, purposeful. Zainab stepped forward. She had been released early that morning, the truth still hid in the damage not yet undone. Her wrists were sore, her eyes tired, but something stronger than fear moved her now. She walked past the whispers, past the stunned faces, straight toward Kola. She knelt beside him without hesitation. Ignoring the water soaking into her skirt, she took his trembling hand and helped him sit up. Then she removed her scarf and gently wiped the soap from his face, her touch careful, reverent. "Are you okay?" she whispered. Kola nodded slightly, unable to speak. His lips trembled as he tried to swallow the lump in his throat. Zainab stood. She turned slowly to face the people who had hurt him. Her voice shook at first, but it did not break. "What is wrong with all of you?" she asked. "He comes here before any of you arrive. He cleans your mess. He wipes your spills. He works hard and hurts no one." Silence spread thick and suffocating. "You think he's less because of his uniform," she continued, tears now running freely down her face. "You think that makes you better." No one answered. "I was sick," she said, her voice rising. "I collapsed in this building. None of you helped me, not one of you. But this man," she pointed at Kola, "carried me barefoot through the rain to a clinic. He saved my life." Gasps rippled through the crowd. "And you laugh," Zainab whispered. "You humiliate him. You call yourselves human beings." She turned back to Kola and knelt again, taking his hand firmly. "Let them laugh," she murmured. "I see you. I see the man you are, and I'm not leaving you." With her help, Kola stood. His clothes were soaked, his eyes red, his body aching, but in her gaze he found something he hadn't felt in a long time. Worth. Zainab picked up the bucket, the mop, the rag, every symbol of his humiliation. Then, holding his hand, she walked with him down the hallway. People stepped aside in silence, some unable to meet their eyes, others watching with something dangerously close to shame. For the first time in that cold, heartless company, kindness moved through the halls unafraid. The next day the backlash came swiftly. Zainab returned to find her desk relocated near the corridor, her chair replaced with one that creaked ominously. No one greeted her. Conversations stopped when she entered rooms. At lunch, she sat alone. When she tried to join a table she once shared, the women stood up and left. One brushed past her, deliberately spilling hot coffee onto her file. "Oops," the woman sneered. "Maybe go sit with your cleaner boyfriend." Laughter followed. Zainab sat anyway, hands shaking as she dabbed at the stained papers. Her eyes burned, but she refused to cry in front of them. She had already given them too much of herself. The whispers grew louder over the next few days. Accusations resurfaced. Lies spread unchecked. Zainab worked through it all, had held high heart, heavy but unbroken, until the unthinkable happened. Just before closing time, 2 security officers entered the office. Their presence sent a ripple of fear through the room. "Aaliyah Bello," one of them called coldly. Zainab stood slowly, confusion etched across her face. "Yes, you are under arrest for embezzlement and theft of company funds." Gasps erupted. Phones slipped from hands. Papers fluttered to the floor. What Zainab cried, "That's a mistake. I didn't." Handcuffs closed around her wrists. Nkechi rose from her seat arms, crossed a cruel smile playing on her lips. "You should have known it wouldn't last," she said, "acting like a saint when you're just a thief." Zainab's legs trembled as the guards led her away. She looked around the room desperately, her eyes searching for one face. Kola was not there. The door slammed shut behind her, sealing her fate, at least for now. As the echoes faded, something inside the building shifted. The cruelty that had thrived in silence now felt exposed, trembling under the weight of its own reflection. And somewhere beyond those walls, a reckoning was already in motion. The police cell was colder than Zainab expected. The concrete floor sucked warmth from her body, and the metal bench pressed hard against her back as she sat with her knees pulled close to her chest. The smell of rust, sweat, and old fear hung thick in the air. Somewhere down the corridor a woman cried softly. Somewhere else laughter rose and fell, careless and cruel. Zainab stared at her hands. The red marks from the handcuffs were still there, thin lines burning into her skin like proof that this was real. Not a nightmare. Not a misunderstanding that would dissolve by morning. This was happening. She had been careful all her life, obedient, honest, quiet. She had bent herself into shapes that fit other people's comfort. She had swallowed insults and answered cruelty with silence. And still, here she was, accused, discarded, locked away. Her chest tightened until breathing hurt. She thought of her mother. Mama had always said, "The world may not be kind to you, but do not let it steal your kindness." Zainab pressed her forehead to her knees, the words echoing painfully now. Kindness felt heavy tonight. Like a burden she was no longer strong enough to carry. Hours passed, or maybe only minutes. Time lost meaning in that place. When the guard finally opened the door and barked, visitor Zainab lifted her head slowly, expecting disappointment. Hope had become a dangerous thing. Then she saw him. Kola stood just beyond the bars, his face drawn tight with pain and fury he was barely holding back. His eyes met hers, and for a moment the cell seemed to fade. "Kola," she whispered, her voice breaking. He stepped closer, gripping the cold metal. "I'm here." Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. She reached for him through the bars, and he took her hand gently, as if afraid she might shatter. "I'm sorry," he said hoarsely. "I should have protected you. I should have been there." She shook her head weakly. "They did this because of me. Because I spoke up. Because I didn't stay quiet." "No," he said firmly. "They did this because they are cruel. Because you are light, and light exposes darkness." She closed her eyes. "I don't know how much more I can take." He tightened his grip. "You won't have to, I promise you, Zainab. Tomorrow the truth will come out." She searched his face, looking for doubt. She found none. Only resolve, sharp and unyielding. "I trust you," she said softly. The guard cleared his throat impatiently. The moment ended. Kola released her hand slowly as if memorizing the feel of it, then stepped back. "Hold on," he said. "Just a little longer." When he was gone, the cell felt emptier than before. But something new lingered with her now. Hope. The next morning, the office buzzed with tension thick enough to taste. No one said Zainab's name aloud, but it lived in every whisper, every sideways glance. Some staff members sat rigid at their desks, fingers hovering uselessly over keyboards. Others whispered excitedly, already rewriting the story to suit themselves. She always looked suspicious. I knew there was something off about her. People like that always pretend to be saints. By mid-morning, an email went out. Mandatory meeting, all staff, main conference hall. Confusion rippled through the building. Meetings like that were rare, reserved for crises that could not be contained by whispers. Kola arrived shortly before the meeting began, but this time he did not come with a mop. When the conference room doors opened, conversations died instantly. He walked in wearing a tailored dark suit, the fabric sharp and unmistakably expensive. His posture was straight, his expression calm but commanding. Behind him stood two men in suits and a woman holding a tablet, all moving with quiet authority. For a second, no one recognized him. Then the murmurs started. "Wait. Isn't that? That's the cleaner. No, that can't be him." Kola walked to the front of the room and took the microphone. The room fell into a silence so deep it rang in people's ears. "My name is Kola Mensa," he said evenly, "and I am the owner and CEO of this company." The words hit like thunder. Gasps erupted. Chairs scraped loudly as people shifted in disbelief. Faces drained of color. Some laughed nervously, convinced it had to be a joke. Kola did not smile. "I came into this company disguised as a cleaner." He continued, his voice steady, not to spy, but to observe. "To see who we are when we think no one important is watching." His eyes swept the room, lingering on familiar faces. The laughter had vanished, now replaced by fear. "I was looking for something money cannot buy," he said. "Integrity, kindness, character." He paused, then added quietly, "I found it." The doors at the back of the room opened. Zainab stepped inside. She looked small in the oversized sweater she had been given at the station, her face pale, her eyes tired. A guard followed behind her, then stopped as Kola nodded. The room erupted again, this time in shocked whispers. Kola turned toward her, his gaze softening for just a moment. "I found it in her," he said. Zainab froze her breath, catching painfully in her throat. "And I also found something else," Kola continued, his tone sharpening. "Rot." He gestured to the screen behind him. It flickered to life. Footage filled the room. CCTV recordings played one after another, clear, undeniable. Tina and her accomplices whispering near desks. Hands forging signatures. Files being slipped into bags. Laughter echoing as plans were made. The room descended into chaos. "That's fake," Tina screamed, standing abruptly. "You planned this. You lied to all of us." "Yes," Kola replied calmly. "I lied to protect myself." "You lied to destroy an innocent woman." Security moved swiftly. Tina and the others were restrained as their protests turned to sobs and curses. They were dragged from the room, their cries fading down the corridor. Zainab stood frozen, her mind struggling to catch up. It was over. Just like that. The manager's face was ashen. Others stared at the floor, shame crawling across their features. Kola turned back to Zainab. "You're free," he said gently. Her knees buckled, and for a terrifying second he thought she might fall again. He was at her side in an instant, steadying her. "I'm sorry," he whispered so only she could hear. "I should have ended this sooner." Tears streamed down her face, not of fear this time, but of release. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the city gold, Zainab sat alone in the company garden beneath a wide old tree. The world felt unreal, like she might wake up at any moment, back on the cold cell floor. Footsteps approached. Kola knelt in front of her. "I know," he said softly, "I hurt you. I let you suffer longer than you should have." She didn't look at him right away. "You let them take me," she whispered. His chest tightened. "I never imagined they would go that far. If I could undo it, I would." She finally met his eyes. "I need time." He nodded without hesitation. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here." The truth had come out. Justice had spoken. But healing Kola knew was a longer road. The night after the meeting felt unnaturally quiet. Zainab lay awake on the narrow bed in her room, staring at the ceiling as shadows from passing headlights crawled across the walls. Freedom should have felt like relief, but her chest was heavy, crowded with emotions she could not yet name. Justice had come swiftly, dramatically, but the wounds left behind did not close so easily. Kola's words echoed in her mind. Owner, CEO, disguised. The man who had wiped floors beside her. The man who had shared rain and silence. The man who had carried her through the streets when she collapsed. He had been all of that and something else entirely. She pressed her palm against her chest, feeling the uneven rhythm of her heartbeat. It wasn't anger that hurt the most. It was confusion. Betrayal that came wrapped in kindness was a complicated thing. How could someone protect you with one hand and hide the truth with the other? Across the city, Kola stood by the window of his penthouse, the city lights stretching endlessly beneath him like scattered stars. He had not been here in months. The space felt foreign now, too clean, too quiet, too empty. He had imagined this moment differently. In his mind, revealing the truth would bring clarity, even gratitude. He had not imagined the look in Zainab's eyes when she realized who he was. Not fear, not awe, hurt. He closed his eyes, replaying the moment she had whispered, "You let them take me." It cut deeper than any accusation. The next morning he did not send a car. He did not call ahead. He walked to her door alone. Zainab opened it slowly. Her face was bare, her eyes tired but clear. "I was expecting you," she said softly. They sat in the small living room, the space filled with silence that pressed against their ears. The cracked mirror on the wall reflected two people who had shared something fragile and true, and now stood on opposite sides of it. "I never planned for it to happen like that," Kola began. "I didn't come in disguise to deceive you. I came because I was afraid." She listened without interrupting. "I've been surrounded by people who smile because of what I have," he continued. "I wanted to know if anyone could love me without the suit, without the name. I needed to know." Zainab looked down at her hands. "I understand why you hid," she said quietly. "What hurts is that I trusted you with everything, and when I needed someone most, you weren't there, not as yourself." His voice cracked. "I will never forgive myself for that." She was silent for a long moment. Then she stood and walked to the window looking out at the street below, the same street she had walked barefoot so many nights. "I don't hate you," she said at last, "but I need time. What we had was real to me. Now, I don't know where it fits." Kola nodded, swallowing the urge to beg. "I'll wait, as long as it takes." He left without another word. Days passed. Zainab returned to work, though the office no longer felt the same. People avoided her now, not out of cruelty but shame. Apologies came quietly, awkwardly. Some were sincere, others were not. She accepted none of them right away. At night, she replayed memories the way Kola had smiled shyly, when she thanked him, the way his voice had steadied her in the cell, the way he had slept on the floor so she could rest. Those things were real. She knew that. The truth didn't erase them. It complicated them. One evening, Kola invited her to see something. He did not say where. Curiosity won over hesitation. They drove in silence to the edge of the city where the air smelled of salt and the ocean hummed softly in the distance. The building they entered was tall but understated glass reflecting the fading sunset. "This is where I live," Kola said as the elevator rose. Not the image people expect. The doors opened to a warm, quiet space, soft light, simple art, wide windows that framed the sea like a promise. No gold pillars, no marble excess, just peace. "I built this place to rest," he said, "but it's been empty." He led her to the balcony. The city glittered below them, alive and endless. "I wanted you to see my world," he said, "because you're part of it if you want to be." Zainab turned to him. The wind lifted her hair gently, carrying away some of the weight in her chest. "This doesn't change who you were to me," she said slowly, "but it changes what we have to rebuild." He nodded. "I'm ready." The morning after, she woke to the smell of frying plantains and eggs. She found Kola in the kitchen wearing an apron that read "The Real Boss." He looked almost embarrassed when she laughed. "You cook," she asked. "For you," he replied, "every day if you let me." They ate together, sharing stories that had nothing to do with titles or money. For the first time since the truth came out, Zainab felt something loosen inside her. Trust did not return all at once, but it began to grow. Months later, under a giant tree in his mother's hometown, they stood before elders and family. The ceremony was simple, filled with meaning rather than spectacle. Zainab wore ivory embroidered with gold patterns that spoke of heritage and resilience. Kola wore traditional attire that honored where he came from, not what he owned. When they exchanged vows, there were no rehearsed lines. "I choose your truth over riches," Zainab said, "and I choose your heart over the world," Kola replied. A year later, a baby's cry filled a hospital room. Zainab smiled through tears as Kola held their son, awe written across his face. They named him Imani Faith. In the evenings, they sat together humming old songs, watching the city lights flicker on one by one. Their joy was quiet now, complete, and Zainab understood something she had not known before. Justice may come loudly, but healing comes softly. Life did not transform overnight after the truth came out. For Zainab, freedom did not mean forgetting. It meant learning how to live again in a world that had once rejected her so completely. The days after the scandal were strangely quiet. The same streets still roared with traffic. The same vendors shouted into the heat. But inside her something fundamental had shifted. She returned to the office 1 week later. Not because she had to, but because she chose to. The moment she stepped into the building, silence followed her. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Eyes dropped to the floor. The same people who had laughed at her, accused her, and watched her be dragged away in handcuffs now could not meet her gaze. Her desk had been restored. New chair, fresh stationery. An apology letter sat neatly on top, signed by management. She did not touch it. Instead, she sat down, opened her laptop, and began to work. Word spread quickly that Kola had not only exposed corruption, but dismantled it. Entire departments were audited. Senior staff were suspended pending investigation. New policies were announced not through speeches, but through action. The company was changing. And so was Zainab. She no longer kept her eyes lowered when she walked. She greeted people the same way she always had, with kindness. But now there was a steadiness in her voice that hadn't been there before. She no longer apologized for existing. Some people tried to speak to her. "I'm sorry," they said quietly, awkwardly. "We didn't know others offered. We should have helped." Zainab listened. She did not argue. She did not comfort them. She simply nodded and moved on. Forgiveness, she had learned, did not mean reopening wounds before they healed. Kola watched all of this from a careful distance. He had offered her a promotion. She declined. "I want to earn it," she said. "Not because of who you are, because of who I am." He respected her more for it. Instead, he made changes she could not see at first: anonymous support funds for low-level staff, quiet salary adjustments, a strict anti-harassment policy enforced without favoritism. Cleaners were given health insurance. Security guards were trained to intervene, not laugh. The building began to breathe differently. One evening, weeks later, Zainab stayed late to finish a report. The office lights dimmed automatically, leaving only her section illuminated. As she packed up, she noticed Kola standing by the window, jacket in hand. "You didn't have to wait," she said. "I wanted to," he replied. They walked out together into the warm evening air, not as CEO and staff, not as savior and victim, just two people. "I've been thinking," Zainab said as they crossed the street, "about everything that happened." Kola slowed his pace. "And I don't regret being kind," she said, "even when it hurt, especially then." He smiled gently. "That's what makes you, you." She stopped walking and turned to him. "But kindness needs boundaries. I'm learning that too." He nodded. "So am I." That night, she invited him to her room. Not out of need, not out of gratitude, out of choice. The space was still small, still modest. The light flickered once before settling. But it was hers. "This is where I survived," she said quietly. Kola looked around, taking in the cracked mirror, the thin mattress, the small wooden locker. He imagined her studying by candlelight, crying quietly into photographs, choosing generosity over hunger. He felt the weight of it press into his chest. "You won't ever have to live like this again," he said softly. She shook her head. "No, but I'll never forget who I was here." They sat on the floor backs against the wall, sharing roasted corn from a street vendor downstairs. No talk of wealth, no talk of titles, just laughter, small and real. Weeks turned into months. Zainab began volunteering on weekends quietly without announcements. She helped women who reminded her of herself navigate paperwork, find work, understand their rights. She didn't tell them her story unless they asked. And when they did, she told it simply. "I survived," she would say. "So can you." Kola supported her from behind the scenes. He never took credit, he never interfered. He watched her grow into a strength that no amount of money could manufacture. One afternoon she found him sitting alone in the company garden, head bowed. "Are you okay?" she asked. He looked up. "I was thinking about my mother." She sat beside him. "She would have loved you," he said quietly, "not because of what you endured, but because of how you endured it." Zainab reached for his hand. "She raised you well." That was the moment he knew. Not with certainty born of power, but with peace. When he asked her to marry him, there were no cameras, no grand announcement. Just a quiet evening, the city lights below them, and a simple question spoken with honesty. "Will you walk with me for the rest of this life?" he asked. She did not answer immediately. She thought of the cell, the humiliation, the mop bucket, the rain, and the man who carried her when she could not carry herself. "Yes," she said at last, "but we walk as equals." He smiled, tears shining. "Always." The wedding was not extravagant, it was meaningful. Held beneath a giant tree in his mother's hometown, elders blessed them with words older than money. Drums played softly. Children laughed freely. Zainab wore a dress sewn by local women who had followed her story with quiet pride. When she stood before Kola, she did not see a billionaire. She saw a man who had learned through her to be better. And when they spoke their vows, the crowd felt it. This was not a fairy tale. It was a testimony. A year later, when their son cried for the first time in a hospital room filled with light, Zainab held Kola's hand and smiled through tears. They named the boy Imani, Faith, because faith had carried them when nothing else could, and in the quiet evenings that followed, when Zainab hummed old songs her mother once sang and Kola watched with his son asleep on his chest, they understood something deeply true. The world may reward cruelty loudly, but it honors kindness in the end. The months following the wedding were calm on the surface, but beneath that calm ran currents neither Zainab nor Kola could ignore. Life, they both learned, did not stop testing you simply because you had survived the worst. Zainab moved into Kola's penthouse slowly, intentionally. She did not arrive with suitcases full of expectations. She brought only what she needed: her clothes, her books, the photographs of her family, and the quiet habits that had kept her alive when she had nothing else. The space was large, bright and peaceful, but she refused to let it erase her sense of self. "This is our home," she said one evening as she placed her mother's photograph on a small shelf by the window. "Not a reward, not a rescue." Kola nodded. "I know." At work, the company was still healing. The arrests had shaken the staff deeply. Tina and the others were gone, but their absence left behind uncomfortable questions. How many people had known and said nothing? How many had laughed simply because it was easier than standing up? Kola refused to let the answers be buried. He instituted open hearings where employees could speak anonymously about abuse, intimidation, and corruption. Some stories were small. Others were devastating. Each one confirmed what he had learned as a cleaner, that cruelty thrived not just because of villains, but because of silence. Zainab attended none of the meetings officially, but people sought her out anyway. In stairwells, by the elevators, outside the gate at closing time. "I saw what they did to you," a young woman whispered one evening, eyes lowered. "And I'm sorry I didn't speak." Zainab studied her for a long moment. "Next time," she said gently, "speak. That's all I ask." Not everyone was ready for change. Some staff resented Kola's reforms. They smiled in meetings, nodded in agreement, then whispered bitterness behind closed doors. "He's doing all this because of her. She thinks she's special now. Power just changed hands, that's all." The words reached Zainab eventually. They always did. One afternoon she overheard two women talking in hushed tones near the restroom. If she hadn't played hero, none of this would have happened. She ruined everything for us. Zainab stood still, heart tightening, not with fear but with disappointment. She had hoped foolishly that truth would change hearts instantly. It didn't. That evening, she told Kola what she'd heard. He was furious. "I'll shut this down," he said immediately. "One warning and—" She shook her head. "No." He stopped, surprised. "They're allowed to feel uncomfortable," she said calmly. "They're being forced to look at themselves. That's not easy, but they're attacking you. They're afraid," she replied. "Fear makes people ugly. If we punish every whisper, we become what we're trying to fix." Kola studied her, seeing again what had drawn him to her from the start, not just kindness, but wisdom. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for keeping me honest." The real test came weeks later. An anonymous report landed on Kola's desk, thick with documents and accusations. It claimed that Zainab had received special treatment after the scandal. Financial benefits influenced power she had not earned. The evidence was carefully assembled. Numbers, dates, signed statements. It was convincing. Kola felt his stomach drop as he read through it, not because he believed it, but because he knew how easily lies could wear the mask of truth. He did not confront Zainab immediately. Instead, he did what he had promised himself he would always do. He investigated. For 3 days, he said nothing. He reviewed records, cross-checked accounts, spoke to auditors without revealing names. Every instinct urged him to tear the report apart publicly, to defend her without question. But he didn't. On the fourth night, Zainab noticed the distance. "You're quiet," she said as they sat on the balcony, city lights flickering below. "What's wrong?" He hesitated, then handed her the file. She read it slowly. Her hands did not shake. Her breathing did not quicken. When she finished, she closed the folder and placed it on the table between them. "So, this is my test," she said softly. His chest tightened. "I never doubted you." She looked at him. Really looked at him. "But you checked." "Yes." She nodded once. "Good." He stared at her confused. "Good, yes," she said. "Because love without truth is just comfort, and comfort can lie." She reached for his hand. "You did exactly what you should have done." Relief flooded him so quickly it almost hurt. The investigation cleared her completely. The report was traced back to a former manager who had escaped earlier audits. He was arrested quietly. No announcement, no spectacle. When word spread that Zainab had been accused again and cleared again, something shifted. People began to understand. She was not protected by power, she was protected by truth. After that, the whispers faded. Not entirely, but enough. One morning, Zainab stood in the same hallway where she had once knelt to wipe spilled tea from the floor. The tiles gleamed now. New cleaners moved confidently uniforms, clean heads held high. One of them, a young man, nervous and thin, hesitated when he saw her. "Ma," he said softly, unsure. "Good morning." She smiled. "Good morning. How are you settling in?" His eyes widened slightly. "Fine, Ma, thank you." As he walked away, Kola joined her. "Do you ever think about that day?" he asked quietly. She nodded. "Not with pain anymore." "What do you feel gratitude?" she said. "For knowing who I am." That evening they returned to her old neighborhood. Not to visit, not to relive, but to give back. Zainab stood in the small community center speaking to women who looked exactly as she once had, tired, careful, hopeful, in quiet ways. "I won't tell you it's easy," she said. "It isn't. I won't tell you kindness always protects you. Sometimes it doesn't." She paused, meeting their eyes. "But I will tell you this, your dignity is not negotiable, and your voice matters even when it shakes." Afterward, an elderly woman approached her, eyes shining. "You remind me of someone," she said. "A young woman who pushed my wheelbarrow in the rain once." Zainab smiled, tears rising unexpectedly. "She taught me everything I know." As they walked home under the night sky, Kola slipped his hand into hers. "You're stronger than you think," he said. She squeezed his fingers. "So are you." They had faced injustice, they had faced betrayal, they had faced each other's shadows. And still they stood. Not because the world had become kinder, but because they had chosen not to let it make them cruel. Even after the storm had passed, the sky did not clear all at once. For Zainab, the world felt steadier now, but she had learned not to trust calm too quickly. She woke each morning with gratitude and caution. Healing, she understood, was not a straight road. It curved, it doubled back, it tested memory and resolve. The company continued its slow transformation. Audits concluded. Policy settled into practice. New faces arrived, careful, hopeful, uncertain. Kola insisted on transparency not as a slogan, but as a habit. Doors remained open. Meetings were recorded. Decisions were explained. Power once hidden behind glass walls was pulled into the light, and yet, somewhere in the shadows, resentment festered. It began quietly. An unsigned letter appeared at the reception desk one Monday morning. No threats, no demands, just a question written in neat, deliberate handwriting. How long before the cleaner's wife decides she owns the place? The receptionist laughed nervously and tossed it aside, but the words lingered. Within days, whispers followed, carefully planted, cleverly vague. A rumor here, A suggestion there, not enough to accuse, just enough to corrode. Zainab heard them, of course. She always did. People think I'm changing, she told Kola one evening as they washed dishes together, that I'm becoming something else. He looked up. Are you... She considered the question. I'm becoming more myself. That scares people. He smiled softly, then let them be scared. But the shadows were patient. One afternoon, as Zainab prepared to leave the office, a woman from procurement approached her hesitantly. Can I talk to you? She asked, glancing around. They stepped into a quiet corridor. The woman wrung her hands, eyes darting. There's talk, she said, about a leaked document. People are saying it came from your desk. Zainab felt a familiar chill. Not fear recognition. What document? She asked calmly. A budget projection. Internal. It was sent anonymously to a competitor. Zainab nodded slowly. Thank you for telling me. That night she told Kola everything. He listened without interrupting, jaw tight. When she finished, he exhaled sharply. I won't let this happen again, he said. I'll handle it. She shook her head. We handle it. The next morning, before rumors could harden into accusation, Zainab requested a meeting with compliance. Not privately, publicly, recorded. Gasps rippled through the office as she stood before them, composed, unflinching. I've been informed of a potential leak, she said. I welcome a full investigation. Please audit my access logs, communications, and work history. I have nothing to hide. Silence followed. Some people looked away. Others stared stunned by the audacity of her transparency. This was not the posture of guilt. It was the posture of certainty. The investigation moved swiftly. Access logs showed nothing unusual. Communications were clean. The leak, when traced, led elsewhere, far from Zainab's desk, far from her influence. The culprit was a mid-level consultant recently hired who had underestimated the new system's reach. He was dismissed quietly. The whispers died down not because people suddenly became kind, but because the truth had arrived before the lie could settle in. That evening, Zainab stood alone in the company garden, the same place where she had once waited with her heart in pieces. The old tree rustled softly above her leaves, whispering secrets she no longer needed to hear. Kola joined her, slipping his jacket over her shoulders when the breeze turned cool. You didn't flinch, he said. She smiled faintly. I used to flinch all the time. What changed? I learned that silence protects the wrong people. He nodded. I learned that watching isn't the same as acting. They stood together, the city breathing around them. Weeks later, an invitation arrived from the board, an offer for Zainab to lead a new internal ethics and welfare unit. The role was symbolic, yes, but also practical. It would give employees a place to speak, to report, to seek guidance without fear. Zainab read the letter twice. I don't want to be a figurehead, she said. They know that Kola replied. That's why they asked. She accepted on one condition. No title tied to my marriage, no special privileges. Publish my decisions. Review my work like everyone else's. The board agreed. On her first day in the role, Zainab did not change her routine. She arrived early. She greeted the guard. She brewed her own tea. She opened the door to her small office and left it that way open. People came slowly at first. Tentative. Unsure. A cleaner with a sore back and unpaid overtime. A junior analyst harassed by a supervisor. A security guard mocked for reporting theft. Zainab listened. She did not promise miracles. She promised process, protection, persistence. Word spread. Not loudly, not proudly, but steadily. One afternoon, as she reviewed a case file, she paused, hand resting on the desk. The paper beneath her fingers was smooth, unremarkable. And yet, she felt a swell of emotion she hadn't expected. This desk, she thought, this building, these halls, they no longer owned her pain. They had become a place where her pain mattered. That night at home, Kola found her sitting quietly staring at nothing. "Are you tired?" he asked. "Yes," she said, then smiled. "But it's the good kind." He sat beside her. "You don't have to carry this alone." "I know," she replied. "But I choose to carry it." There were still people who resented her. Always would be. There were still days when memories returned uninvited metal cuffs, cold floors, laughter that burned. But there were also mornings when a cleaner waved with confidence, afternoons when an intern spoke up and was heard, evenings when the city lights felt less like judgment and more like witness. One weekend they returned to her old room. Not to stay, not to mourn, just to stand there together. The walls were the same, the cracks unchanged. A new tenant lived there now, a young woman with a hopeful smile and tired eyes. Zainab offered her tea. "This place kept me alive," she said quietly as they stepped back into the street. Kola squeezed her hand. "And you turned survival into purpose." She looked at him, eyes clear. "We did." As they walked away, Zainab felt something settle deep within her, a certainty that did not depend on approval or applause. The last shadow had tried to pull her back into fear. She had stepped forward instead. And the world at last had learned that she would not go quietly again. The morning the court proceedings began, the city seemed to hold its breath. Clouds hung low over the skyline, heavy and unmoving, as if the sky itself was waiting to see how the day would end. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered in clusters, microphones raised, cameras ready. The scandal that had once lived quietly behind office walls had grown teeth. Names were known now, faces exposed, and at the center of it all stood a woman who had once been dragged away in shame. Zainab arrived without spectacle. She wore a simple navy dress, her hair neatly wrapped, her posture calm. There were no bodyguards at her side, no signs of power clinging to her steps. Just Kola walking slightly behind her, not as a shield, but as support. Inside the courtroom buzzed with low murmurs. Former colleagues sat stiffly on wooden benches, eyes darting. Some recognized her and looked away. Others stared openly, curiosity mixing with unease. Tina sat at the defendant's table. Gone was the sharp confidence, the loud laughter. Her shoulders were hunched now, her eyes rimmed with red. When she noticed Zainab, something flickered across her face, fear, resentment, disbelief. Zainab met her gaze. She did not smile, she did not gloat, she did not look away. The judge entered. The room rose. Silence settled like dust. The charges were read slowly, methodically. Embezzlement, forgery, conspiracy, abuse of office. Each word landed with weight, stripping away excuses, leaving only facts. Evidence followed. Emails projected on screens. Bank transfers traced cleanly through accounts. CCTV footage replayed the same images that had once shattered the office, now carrying the force of law. Tina's voice echoed through the courtroom, laughing, planning, confident she would never be caught. Gasps rippled through the room. Zainab sat still, hands folded in her lap, listening. This was not vindication. It was closure, something quieter, heavier. When it was time for witness testimony, Zainab stood. Her heart beat steadily. Not fast, not slow, just present. She took the stand and spoke plainly. She did not embellish, she did not dramatize. She did not soften the truth. She described the missing chair, the spilled tea, the laughter, the handcuffs biting into her wrists, the cell floor cold beneath her knees. She spoke of collapsing at work and being ignored, of being called a thief by people who had stolen her dignity long before they touched company funds. Her voice never wavered. When she finished, the courtroom was silent. The defense tried to shake her. They asked if she had benefited from her relationship with Kola, if favoritism had influenced outcomes, if resentment had colored her memory. Zainab answered each question calmly. "My integrity is not borrowed," she said once. "It existed before I met him." The judge nodded. By afternoon the verdict was clear. Guilty. Tina broke down as the sentence was read. Years in prison. Fines. Permanent dismissal. Her accomplices received their own judgments, lesser but final. The gavel struck wood-sealing consequences that could no longer be undone. As people rose to leave, murmurs filled the air. Some shook their heads. Others whispered prayers. A few glanced at Zainab with something new in their eyes, respect perhaps, or recognition. Outside, the cameras surged forward. "Zainab, how does it feel to be vindicated? Do you forgive them?" She paused, the noise washing over her. "I don't live for vindication," she said simply. "I live for truth." Then she walked away. That evening, the company held a quiet meeting. No speeches, no applause, just acknowledgement. The case was closed. Reforms would continue, oversight strengthened. Names removed from walls where they never should have been honored. Kola watched as Zainab spoke briefly to the staff, not as a leader delivering orders, but as a human being offering perspective. "Justice doesn't erase pain," she said, "but it gives it a place to rest." Later, as dusk settled, they returned to the garden beneath the old tree. The same bench, the same rustling leaves. Zainab exhaled slowly, as if releasing something she had carried for years. "It's done," she said. Kola nodded. "Are you okay?" She considered the question. "I'm lighter." He reached for her hand. "I'm proud of you." She smiled, small but genuine. "I'm proud of us." A breeze moved through the branches, carrying the sounds of the city cars' voices, life continuing. For the first time since that terrible day in the office, Zainab felt no need to look over her shoulder. The past had spoken. The truth had answered. And the silence of the guilty was finally complete. The morning after the verdict arrived quietly. No headlines waited outside Zainab's door. No cameras followed her steps. The city moved on as cities always did, traffic, thick voices, loud, life impatient. But inside her something had finally settled. For the first time in years, she woke without fear. Sunlight slipped through the curtains, gentle and warm, resting on her face like a blessing she no longer felt unworthy to receive. Zainab lay still for a moment, listening to her own breathing. It was steady, unhurried, whole. She rose, wrapped her shawl around her shoulders, and walked to the balcony. Below, Lagos stretched endlessly chaotic, beautiful, unforgiving, alive. This city had broken her once. It had tried to bury her, and yet it had also shaped her into someone who could not be erased. Kola joined her silently, handing her a cup of tea. "Sleep well?" he asked. "Yes," she said. Then smiled softly, for the first time in a long time. They stood together without speaking. Words felt unnecessary now. Some battles were meant to end in quiet, not noise. Later that day, Zainab returned to the office, not because she was expected to, but because she wanted to close a chapter properly. She walked through the glass doors with calm confidence, her steps measured, her head held high. People noticed. Some nodded respectfully. Others offered hesitant smiles. A few looked away, still uncomfortable with the mirror her presence held up to their past behavior. Zainab did not take offense. Healing, she knew, was not a performance. She walked the halls slowly, intentionally. Here was the corridor where her chair had disappeared. Here was the spot where tea had soaked into the floor. Here was the stairwell where she had cried in silence. She felt no bitterness, only distance. In the break room, she found a young woman sitting alone, shoulders hunched, eyes fixed on her phone. Zainab recognized the posture immediately. It was the posture of someone trying not to be seen. "Is this seat taken?" Zainab asked gently. The woman startled, then shook her head. "No, ma. They sat together. After a moment, the woman spoke in a rush. I just wanted to say, when everything happened, I was scared. I didn't speak, but you gave me courage. Zainab looked at her carefully. Courage grows, she said. Use it when it matters. The woman nodded, eyes shining. That afternoon, Zainab submitted her resignation. Not out of anger, not out of exhaustion, but out of clarity. The board was stunned. The HR manager tried to persuade her to stay. Kola said nothing, watching her closely, trusting her process. I'm not leaving because I was hurt, Zainab explained calmly. I'm leaving because I know where I'm needed next. She walked out of the building without applause, without regret. Within weeks, Zainab opened a small foundation. It wasn't grand. It didn't carry her name in bold letters. It operated quietly from a modest office near the market street, the same street where she had once pushed a wheelbarrow through the rain. The foundation focused on women like her former self. Office assistants accused without voice. Cleaners ignored when mistreated. Young women silenced by fear of losing survival jobs. Zainab taught them how to document abuse, how to speak clearly, how to stand without shouting. She did not promise wealth. She promised dignity. Word spread slowly. Not through marketing, through stories. She listens. She understands. She believes us. Kola supported her but never overshadowed her work. He funded quietly. He stayed in the background. When people praised him, he redirected the light. This is her calling, he would say. I'm just walking beside her. At home, life was gentle. Evenings were sacred. Zainab cooked dishes her mother once made, filling the penthouse with smells of pepper onions memory. Kola learned to hum along to songs he didn't know the words to. They laughed often, soft, unforced laughter born of safety. Some nights, Zainab still dreamed of the cell. She would wake, shaking breath, shallow heart racing. Kola never asked questions. He would pull her close, grounding her in the present. Slowly, the dreams lost their power. One evening, as rain tapped lightly against the windows, Zainab sat with her journal open, pen hovering above the page. "What are you writing?" Kola asked. "My story," she replied. "For the foundation." "No," she said. "For myself." She paused, then added, "I spent so long letting others define me. I want to choose my own words now." He kissed her forehead. "They'll be powerful." Months later, at a small community gathering, Zainab stood before a group of women and men seated on plastic chairs under a tent. No stage, no microphone, just her voice. "I won't tell you that kindness guarantees safety," she said. It doesn't. I learned that the hard way. The crowd listened, breath held. "But I will tell you this," she continued. "Silence guarantees suffering, and dignity is something no one is allowed to take from you unless you let them." Applause rose not loud, but deep. As the sun dipped low, Zainab stepped down, heart full. An elderly woman approached her slowly, eyes warm. "You were the girl who helped me push my wheelbarrow," she said. Zainab smiled, tears forming. "You were the woman who told me God would surprise me." The woman laughed softly. He did. That night, Zainab and Kola stood together on the balcony, city lights shimmering below. The ocean hummed in the distance, steady and eternal. "Do you ever wish it had been easier?" Kola asked quietly. She thought for a long moment. "No," she said. "Easier would have made me smaller." He nodded. "You're the bravest person I know." She looked at him, eyes clear. "I was scared the whole time. Bravery usually is." As the wind moved gently around them, Zainab felt something she had never felt before. Not relief, not victory. Freedom. She was no longer running from the past, no longer waiting for justice to save her. She had chosen a life rooted in truth, shaped by pain, guided by compassion. And for the first time, the future did not feel like a threat. It felt like a promise. This woman who was wronged or a man who hid his identity. It is about what happens when quiet goodness is tested by cruelty, and truth is forced to walk through fire before it can stand in the light. Zainab's journey reminds us that dignity does not come from position, wealth, or approval. It comes from knowing who you are even when the world tries to tell you otherwise. Life is not always fair. Sometimes the kindest people are hurt the most, not because they are weak, but because their light exposes what others try to hide. Zainab chose kindness when it cost her comfort. She chose courage when silence felt safer. And when justice finally came, she chose healing over bitterness and purpose over revenge. Her story teaches us that survival is not the end of the journey. What truly matters is what we become after we survive. We also learn that love is not proven by power but by presence. Kola's wealth could have saved her quickly, but it was his humanity, patience, and willingness to change that built something real. Together, they show us that true transformation begins inside long before it shows on the outside. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments. Where are you watching from, and what part of Zainab's journey spoke to you the most? And if you believe in stories of justice, healing, and hope rising from pain, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps these stories reach others who may need them today.